Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today's Friday, so it's Self-Improvement Friday, and my friend John is here to talk about various topics on self-improvement. It's been amazing. We have an amazing group of regulars who contribute so much to the discussion, and both John and I really look forward to this day. So, John, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, for everybody new, welcome. We do these every Friday. I try to focus on applicable philosophical or psychological concepts that will improve the foundation of our lives. So we've done a lot of philosophy and psychology and classics in the past, and I would say, what would a self-improvement channel or discussion be without imbuing some sort of importance of health and physiology and wellness? So this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. It's extremely important to me. I think my journey of self-improvement started with health and wellness and eventually migrated over into the intellectual realm. So this is going to be a very, meaningful discussion for me. And we're going to get started. So I'm going to start with a quote, and then we're going to dive into a little bit of implications and analyses and et cetera. So this is a quote. I don't know if it was a particular author, but my friend was in a museum in Berlin, and she sent this picture to me because she said I would appreciate the quote. And it was alongside a exhibit of some Greek sculptures. So it says, both aesthetic and ethical aspects are expressed in the ideal of, I don't know how to pronounce this, Kalokagathia, which means excellence in Greek. A man was to be beautiful and good, equally striving towards physical perfection and intellectual and moral education. I wouldn't really say perfection. I would say like maybe proportion rather. But I think that's a good foundation to start this discussion on. So the title, as mentioned in Meetup, was the relationship between intellect and physiology. Frequently we see in society, a lot of people tend to overemphasize one at the expense of another. And I want to kind of imbue them together and coalesce them in this discussion here, hopefully. So how I'm going to do this, I'm going to split this discussion into two parts. So the first, what I want to do is establish, part of my philosophy, part of my belief system on health and wellness and physiology. And then we're going to move into some practical, information. So like studies and statistics and things like that. So I have three main points that I want to establish for my philosophy for the intellectual part of this discussion. And that is first, the lessons that I've learned from a journey of physical wellness. Second, what I believe the philosophical implications are of disease and not having health. And thirdly, I want to establish the philosophy of health as the most natural state of existence. And then we'll move into the physiology with the study and all that, with the data. So the first point, I'm going to read another quote by Plato, and we're going to dive into interpretations of this. So Plato says, lack of activity destroys the good condition of every human. So that's one quote. The second quote, he says, through education and physical activity, man can attain perfection. Now, again, using the word perfection, I don't really like it. I don't really think there's a lot of interpretation around that. So I wouldn't really say perfection, but I would posit it as living most naturally. So I want to look at the distinction between what we can view from a healthy vessel, a healthy body, you can say health and wellness, and having a vessel that is, I don't want to say diseased, but not really living with health as a priority. So the first thing I would see as this distinction is, I would say that however you want to look at this, ontologically or theologically, you can say the soul inhabits the body. Okay, so we are not our body, we are the awareness or the identification with behind it that we identify with. So I would say the soul is the body is the vessel of the soul. And I think the nature of the soul is expansive, it is expressive, it wants to accumulate experience and knowledge and wisdom and map uncharted territory. So it's this expressive instrument and it's this expressive ideal, and the body is the soul's instrument. Okay, so it's the vehicle for the soul. And I would say the healthy vessel, the healthy body, would represent a catalyst for the soul. In other words, it is going to be an instrument that the soul can expand and express itself through. And on the other hand, an unhealthy vessel would be, I would say, in terms of strong language, like a prison for the spirit, because it's being mitigated, it's being governed by, it's being limited. The soul's being limited by the limitations of this, disease of not being able to, explore and establish and accumulate experiences. So another way to phrase this is to say, with health, you can do what you want in life. And without health, you do what you can in life. That's a very big distinction. So looking at it practically, you can say in terms of looking at it like in terms of evolution. Okay, so in terms of the body as a vessel, as an experience, as a catalyst for the soul, you can look at this in early development of humans. So every child is obviously running around. You can make an ontological argument. They are vehicles for the expression of the soul. They're expansive, they're running around, they're looking for experiences, they're trying to map their territory on the world. They're engaging in sports, they're running and jumping around, right? And I would look at that as a parallel to the intellectual desire of wanting to explore, and the bodily adaptation to be able to do that. They're completely on par. So that's beautiful, because they're expressions for the spirit. As we get older, as we start to stagnate, as we begin to prioritize other things over our health, we lose that vision. But I don't think that we lose that incarnation of that desire to express, and it gets suppressed, and it gets governed, and it gets limited. And I think that leads to disease. So there's a quote, I think it's from William Blake. He says, "He who desires but acts not breeds pestilence." So if you wanted to do something, let's say practically speaking, if you wanted to play a sport, if you wanted to, maybe you had a lifelong dream of snowboarding or mountain biking or whatever it happened to be, you wanted to run a marathon, you want to do this thing, but you're limited or governed by your body, I believe that would lead to psychological turmoil, not only because of the disease state of the body or the state of not being physically able to do so, but the mismatch between the intellect and the spirit, you could say, and the body as a governor. So I think there are obviously limitations to what we can do and what we can express and what we can experience in our lifetime. But I personally don't believe, I think it's for lack of a better term, a tragedy to be I guess, governed by the physical vessel, if you wanted to do those things as an instrument. And there's, going back to Plato's mentor, I mentioned Plato's quote. One of my favorite quotes that kind of encapsulates my philosophy on this exactly is from Socrates, where he says, "It is no man has the right to be an amateur in the matter of physical training. It is a shame for a man to grow old without seeing the beauty and strength of which his body is capable." So I completely agree with that sentiment. And it makes me think of, if you ask yourself the question, how much, fun and enjoyment and expansion and experiences and beautiful memories and enthusiasm and livelihood are we missing out because we are not in optimal shape for peak performance? That's a very good question to ask ourselves. And that's kind of something that I asked myself when I began, I guess, my fitness journey, my health journey, but becoming more intentional with improving my health. That's a cornerstone philosophy that I've always held on to ever since I read that quote. It's a shame to grow old without seeing what your body is capable of, without, having that limitation of disease or ill health. So I want to migrate into the second point, and that is all of the things that I've personally learned from being more intentional with my health journey. So long before I was ever into psychology, philosophy, personal development, self-help, years before I was graced with the words of Dante and Plato and Socrates and Dostoevsky and Nietzsche and Emerson and Thoreau and everybody who's influenced me as mentors, long before all of that, timeless gems and advice and wisdom, I extracted several philosophical life lessons from a fitness journey. And I think there's multiple, I'll list a few, but I think the one I want to press on most and elucidate on most is the fact of just growth in all aspects. So if we operate from a place of growth, from a definition of growth happens outside of comfort zones, or either on or a little bit beyond a barrier of some sort, we can agree on that. Hopefully growth happens outside of a comfort zone or on or past a barrier. I know of no better methodology to find barriers than physical fitness. So for example, we can reach intellectual barriers all the time, but what we can do, the mind is clever enough to justify them away, to, you know, imbue the ego into it and say, oh, I knew that, but I was talking about this, right? We can justify, we can get around it. But let's say you're in the gym, or you're running sprints or something. You physically hit a barrier. You know, you can do 50 push-ups in a row. You physically cannot do 51, okay? And there's no embarrassment in the struggle, right? There's nothing, because there's nothing detrimental about that, because you are actually in that zone of proximal development and optimal growth. And intellectually, like I said, it's a little bit more difficult to do because our ego gets involved. We don't want to really say, I know. A lot of people love the two words, I know, and they say, but, and they just justify it away, or they ignore things, or they twist it and misinterpret it, etc. So it's very easy for the ego to jump in and do that. But in terms of physical fitness, you can't really lie your way out of a set, right? You do your exercise, you do your repetitions with your certain weight, you hit failure, okay? And then that's where actually muscular growth happens, is along that realm of failure. So then you can superimpose that lesson to virtually every single aspect of your life, okay? In your relationships, where you're going to experience most growth is outside of your comfort zone, right? The uncomfortable conversations, your barriers in expressing yourself authentically to your partner, and your needs and your desires and your expectations, etc. Those uncomfortable conversations. Same thing in work. You know, if you're in sales, most of your income is going to come after, you know, maybe you run across a few objections. People say no, or you're in a dry spell, you're not really performing your quota, etc. It's all going to happen outside of these comfort zones. And if you have that, you know, I was lucky enough to have a former version of myself live with my current self in mind. So I was always sacrificing in the gym. And that's one of the biggest lessons that I've learned, is like growth happens outside of the comfort zones. A few more that are worth noting here from my personal fitness journey. I've been involved in the gym. I was a personal trainer, like I mentioned before, all of this philosophy, before any psychology, before I even picked up a book. I was in the gym for, you know, 6, 7 years, 11 years now. But I got a lot of lessons from that period of my life. One, like I said, the growth happening outside of comfort zone. I would say the second thing is relying on consistency over intensity. We actually did a discussion on this I want to say a month and a half ago. Consistency over intensity. A simple example to cover that point is, it's better to run a mile a day and eat an apple a day than run 7 miles and eat 7 apples on Sunday, right? It's not the same thing. You're consuming the same volume over the course of a year, but it's not the same thing, right? You're going all out on one day and then you're just slacking off the other days, right? Same thing in your career, same thing in your relationships, same thing in your family health, everything, virtually every single aspect. A better and more effective approach is consistency over intensity. So you also learn that in this journey of physical wellness. Another one obviously is kind of related to that. I would say I rely on discipline more than I rely on motivation. So it's all good when you set goals, you know, you're seeing progress in the mirror, or your you know, the scale, or how your clothes fit, etc. It's all good when you're feeling emotionally invested in your journey. But when you're not, what happens? You have an option. You can either succumb to your emotions of the moment, or you can push yourself on and do it anyway. And I think that's another profound lesson that I've learned. And again, this spills over into every aspect of our lives. Discipline over motivation, because you're not always going to feel like doing what you need to do. But if you have tasks, if you have goals, and you have them set, all you have to do is execute on that day after day. You hit your little discipline, you run your mile, you talk to your spouse, you don't go to bed in an argument or angry, you ask your boss for that promotion, whatever you have to do, you situate that day, whether you feel like it or not, and the future you is going to thank you for that. Another one, I'm going to say, I can go on forever about all the lessons that I've learned. One more that I want to share before I move into the next point is, I would say, in short, reaping what you sow, in terms of, I'm very much a pragmatically, I guess, focused numbers person. So I love looking at data. I keep a lot of data on my life. I've been tracking my life for 5 or 6 years now in very meticulous detail. And fitness is one of these realms that you can exactly quantify. Okay, so career, it's a little bit hard to look at in numbers, maybe income, but there's other variables in that equation, of course. Relationships, it's hard to express that in a number, of course. There's all types of these areas that we want to improve in our life, but we can't really measure as well as fitness. So fitness, I can measure my circumference measurements. I can measure my weight. I can measure my body fat. I can measure the number of repetitions and sets I do in the gym of a particular weight. I can measure all of my calories, my carbohydrates, my fats, my macros. I can take blood tests and look at my vitamin and mineral and hormone levels. And I can look at all of this in a spreadsheet on numbers. And like, if there's something, 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, 5 years down the road, if I don't have the results I want, I can say, okay, where did I go wrong in this equation? What's the variable that I have to alter in order to get the result that I'm looking for? And more than any other realm that I know of, fitness is the, I guess, quintessence of this, because everything is operating under a variable, under a law of mathematical expression, you could say. So that's one of the biggest things I've learned from those like 4 or 5 lessons I've learned from the gym. And again, this is long before any philosophical or psychological information had entered into my consciousness. So I was very grateful to experience all of that. And then of course, I've seen these similar lessons substantiated in philosophical works and works of classics and fiction and all these things. So that's kind of just been further instantiating it and solidifying it for me, thankfully. So the third point that I want to get into, so we've covered, exercise and the lessons that we can derive from an exercise journey. We've covered the healthy vessel as a catalyst for the spirit and an unhealthy vessel as a prison for the spirit. And the third point I want to establish and talk about is that health is completely natural. So one of the things that I get a lot is people will say to me, I would love to, live a healthy lifestyle, or I would love to do this. I would love to have a 6-pack. I would love to be in a healthy weight. But it seems like you're depriving yourself. It seems like you can't have fun. You can't really watch movies. I can't tell you how many times I've been out with friends on dinners and I'll order nothing to the table because I don't like any of the options because none of it's healthy, or I'll just get water or something. And they look at me like I'm crazy. I can't tell you how many times it's happened. They think I'm depriving myself of something. And I say, no, like all of these other options are depriving me of health. So when I live a healthy lifestyle, the only thing I'm deprived of, I would say, is disease or regret, or a life that I would not enjoy living in 5-10 years. So if you look at it as health philosophically is the natural state of existence, even when we poison our body with, decades of fast food and a sedentary lifestyle, your body is still doing its very, very best job to heal you. It is doing its best job to, activate systems and chemical processes in your vessel to mitigate the release of certain toxins that you ingest from food. It's doing all of it. It's doing its best possible job because, again, health is the natural order of things. You can look at this as the ontological argument as well. Given adequate resources, so let's look at, any other biological entity on Earth. Let's look at plants and trees and flowers. Given adequate resources, sunlight, water, soil, nutrients, the correct climate, etc., those biological organisms are going to reach their zenith. They're going to reach their potential. Okay, that is natural. Expression, again, going back to the soul argument, expression, expansion, evolution, adaptation, improvement, integration is natural. That is the number one law of life, you could say. And all that we do as impediments to that, I would look at those as unnatural. So yes, I don't want to polarize this argument, by the way, and say, oh, you should never watch movies, you should never have a snack, you should never eat candy. Not at all. I'm just positing it as, okay, we should tend to stick to what is natural more than the impediments that we've established as a society because we've gotten comfortable and we tend to not value health as much. So I can tell you a anecdotal example of this. I was on a hike with a friend recently, and we went on to I think the summit was like, we were on a mountain somewhere in New Hampshire, and the summit, I think, was like 3,200 feet or something. And my friend was, he was trudging his way up the mountain, and I've been up the mountain a few times, and I'm kind of trying to encourage him and go fast and run and all this stuff. And I was trying to have him pick up his pace a little bit. And he's like, man, this sucks. This is terrible. Like, this is just brutal. This is miserable. And I said, no, hold on. You need to reframe that, because my argument was, this is natural. Like, this is our natural state to be moving and exploring and expanding. Whatever you did to make this unnaturally hard, that sucks. That is miserable. Okay. So the 5 years of smoking cigarettes, or the, 1,000 hours that you've sat on your couch in the past 2 or 3 years, that is what's miserable, not the actual hike itself. So the hike would be an instrument, or a measurement of like how he was acting, how consistent he was with the principles of health, as a predecessor to that experimentation, to that hike in particular. So once you frame it like that, it looks so much different. Okay, the hike doesn't suck, activity doesn't suck. Sports don't they're not miserable in themselves. I would say that's the natural state of us, and whatever we did to make that unnaturally hard for ourselves, those are the things we should vilify. We shouldn't vilify activity. We should vilify stagnation. So another point off of this, I would say, is going back to the reputation that I've had where people might say, oh, my lifestyle is restrictive, or it's, I'm depriving myself of certain things. I've noticed a pattern. I've only ever heard this from people that live, at least I can, maybe this is a superficial judgment, but I could say live kind of unhealthy lifestyles. For example, they say, oh, but you've never tried ice cream. You've never tried this thing. And like, my argument would be, I've experienced both sides of this. I wasn't always, health wasn't always a, prime value for me. It wasn't always habitual for me to do these things. I've experienced both sides of the spectrum. I've experienced, fast food and eating junk food in my teenage years, and just playing video games and watching movies all the time and escaping reality. I've experienced all that. I've also experienced peak performance. And my argument is, if we're going to make a value judgment here, you have to experience both things before you can say which one's better and which one is depriving the other, vice versa. So that was my argument to them. And I've had several conversations like this, and people just, again, it's like psychological projection. And I get like health and food is a very emotional topic, you can say, for a lot of people. So there's a lot of, I guess, barriers to entry there, and barriers to understanding. So I have two more points that I want to make before we move into the physiology, to like the practical studies and the data and all these things like this. And the first one is, we've lost our sense of value on health in our body. So what I mean by that is, let's look at this as a practical, materialistic example. If if you were driving a, I don't know, let's say a Lamborghini, okay, $200,000 car. Okay, would you, drive it extremely fast on dirt roads, neglect its maintenance, never check the oil, put 87 gas in instead of 93, never upkeep the interior, never clean it, never change the tires, never do any of this? No, that sounds foolish, because it is a very valuable car. It's extremely expensive, okay? So you can superimpose that same argument to the body, okay? We take it for granted because familiarity breeds contempt. We were born with this body, so we tend to not value it. We tend to, as a society, place value on things that are outside of us, things that are exterior. So looking at our body as the most valuable thing, by the way, it's our only home. It's the only thing that we have until the day we die. It's the only thing that we have forever. I would say that should be at the peak of our values. For you look at this Lamborghini, $200,000, that is nothing compared to the body. Okay, so using that example of you wouldn't upkeep maintenance, etc., it sounds foolish, but people do this to their body all the time. Okay, they're inputting poor fuel. You can say, make the argument, 87 gas versus 93 gas. They're not ensuring their proper, adequate intake. We check oil on our cars, but we don't check the nutrients in our blood. It's a little bit redundant to me personally. And in terms of value, in terms of a monetary, I guess, note on it, a heart transplant costs $600,000. That's 3 Lamborghinis. And that's only a heart. Okay, that's one small organ in your chest, not counting all of the other processes that are going on at all times. So for me, I've maybe I'm biased because I've lived with this lifestyle for so long, but it just makes no sense when I look around and I see people just, valuing other things outside of their body, taking better care of their car than they do their body. It doesn't really make sense to me personally. So that's the first thing I want to talk about is the value of the body, looking at it as an instrument. Even in a monetary value, it's literally worth millions of dollars, but we neglect it because we fail to see this value. It's a simple reframing exercise. And the last point that I want to talk about before we get into the physiology and the data is the idea that a lot of people will look at discipline and health and being in the gym and running and exercise and walking on the treadmill and, picking the salad over the cake, whatever it happens to be. They look at these things as hard. They try to vilify these things. They say, oh yes, but a healthy lifestyle, it's so demanding. It's so difficult. And I want to say, okay, take that easy versus hard mentality. And just all you have to do is manifest those. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years in the future. So hard might be, okay, running every day, exercising, eating clean. Maybe that's hard in short term. Easy short term would be eating ice cream and watching Netflix on the couch. Okay. Easy versus hard. Now flip those. Do that easy day for 50 years. Okay. Eat ice cream, sit on the couch, neglect your responsibilities. Don't, live a sedentary life. 40, 50, 60 years in the future, you probably have manifested some sort of deadly disease. Okay. It kills, heart disease alone kills, I think it's like 690,000 people every single year. Leading in number 2 is cancer, which is 490,000 deaths a year. So long-term, a lifestyle like that is going to yield, maybe excess weight gain, maybe brain fog, a lot of these detrimental things. You're not going to live to see your kids or grandchildren grow up. You're not going to be able to play with your grandchildren or children, even for that matter. You might lead to an early death and never see your kids make it to college, for example. That's very hard. Now, looking at the first example of, okay, discipline, running every day, eating healthy is hard. Short term, maybe. Long term, you're free. You're healthy. Okay, you can play with your grandkids. You can watch everybody grow up. You can live the best years of your life, which should be the latter years, the later years of your life, in optimal health. You don't have to have those unnecessary barriers to the quality of your life, such as ill health, or maybe being confined to a wheelchair, or being on, I don't know what those things are called, ventilators, or whatever it happens to be. Now, understandably, there are some, maybe genetic diseases, or there's some cases that are not the direct response of our neglect, maybe, but most are the response of our neglect and not valuing health properly in our former years. So with all of that rant aside, that's part of my philosophy. I can, again, go on forever about like my ideas surrounding health in itself. But I want to move on to the physiology instead of philosophy. So a little bit of like statistics to maybe substantiate kind of what I'm saying a little bit. And I'm going to look at my notes here because I have quite a bit written down. I've only selectively chosen a small portion. Again, these ideas go on exponentially. So this is a study from the British Journal of Health Psychology. And what they did is they took sedentary students, college age students, and they changed their routine to 3 times a week going to the gym. And what they noted was a decrease in stress, a decrease in smoking and alcohol and caffeine consumption, an increase in maintenance of chores, better spending and study habits. And finally, 2 months in, after they rechecked in with these students, they performed better in tests of self-control. So I think that's obviously very practically useful. Even if somebody doesn't want to have the goal of, I want to look like a physique model, I want to have a six-pack, even if it's just practical, or if it's like in your job, you want to make more money, you want to become a better mother or father or brother or a parent to your kids, whatever happens to be, these benefits here are clearly equivocal and can apply in those realms as well. The second study that I found was from Nature, and it says inflammation encourages impulsive decisions and an inability to delay gratification. So inflammation is, in short, it's like the body's natural response to some sort of, I don't want to say disease, but something detrimental going on in the body. So this could be, unhealthy food. It could be fast food. It could be excess weight. It could be being obese. It could be a sedentary life. There's a lot of factors that go into inflammation. And if you have inflammation, it encourages impulsive decisions and an inability to delay gratification. So in what areas would your life be better if you could make less impulsive decision and delay gratification? Every single area of your life, I would argue. So it's kind of this downhill spiral, right? If somebody's in terms of inflammation, they're going to have a increased propensity to choose, that cupcake at the counter over the apple, because inflammation is literally influencing their brain to make poor decisions. And this is going to be even harder. They're digging themselves in an even deeper hole in the first place. So the third study that I found, this is actually from a book called Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. I thought it was actually a really, Daniel Amen. And he says, Alzheimer's disease starts decades before you see the manifestation of any symptoms. Decades. So he goes on to list an example where this woman got Alzheimer's disease at, I think it was like 59 years old. And he traced it back to harmful brain changes that occurred in her 20s. So in her 20s, the type of food she was eating, the type of sedentary lifestyle, the activity or inactivity that she was engaging in influenced her getting Alzheimer's in 40 years, which is crazy. Another study, this is from Harvard. I have two more here. One more study from Harvard says regular exercise improves memory. And I think this is substantiated pretty practically in terms of when you exercise, you have increased blood flow, you have increased endorphin release in your whole circulatory system. A lot of people don't know this. Your brain uses 20% of your resting metabolic rate. So in other words, the total amount of calories that your body burns at rest, just doing nothing, your brain uses 1/5 of that. So if you have a dietary regimen of poor nutrient, not nutrient dense foods, just fast food, candy, foods that lead to inflammation, things that are not nutrient rich, things that do not have vitamins, minerals, etc. Think of how much we are governing literally our thinking process, our memory, our focus, our willpower, our concentration by having poor food in our diet. And the last study is from, I don't remember who it's from, but I saw it on a doctor's page called, her name is Dr. Rhonda Patrick. And she looked at studies in terms of lifestyle factors exerting an epigenetic effect on their DNA. So in short, what she concluded is that if two obese parents had a child, their state of being obese, they have actually influenced their genes. They have influenced both the sperm and the egg cell in their DNA to lead to a child. And what that child has now is an increased susceptibility to heart disease, cancer, diabetes, etc. So that is literally limiting the lifespan of somebody else because of poor decisions in their lifestyle. Now, she noted that it's not only genetic in terms of it's not fixed, so you can have an epigenetic effect. So she actually looked at if both of those parents were to get at a healthy weight before they conceived, that propensity to have those diseases would be gone or maybe drastically reduced. So there's a very big moral and ethical argument for this as well. And I think this is newer research, so a lot of people actually don't know this. I've just learned this year, but that's mind blowing. And arguably, I would look at that. I'm not going to go into the whole moral and ethical approach, but I would look at that as a form of child abuse. If you're limiting somebody else's life because you failed to given the fact you were conscious of this study, of course, because you failed to get a healthy weight before you conceived, I think it's extremely dangerous and unfair to the child because they did nothing wrong to deserve that. So the last point that I want to talk about is in life, we are going to pay one of two pains, okay? It is inevitable. We have to pick one of these two pains. And this goes back to the former argument I was talking about versus like short-term versus long-term. And to conclude, I would posit this dichotomy. In life, we have to pay one of two pains. We can either pay the pain of discipline or we can pay the pain of regret. So discipline means, doing the uncomfortable decisions now, getting our health in order. Yes, it might suck short-term. Yes, it's exhausting. Yes, it's, we much more gladly spend time on entertainment or out with friends or, indulging in experiences and, spending time with our friends, etc. But long-term, that discipline leads to freedom. Okay. And if we choose easy decisions short-term, that leads to long-term regret. So we don't have to pay the pain now if we indulge in easy decisions, Netflix, cake, sedentary lifestyle. But long-term, we have to pay that in terms of regret. Okay, so going back to the example, we're going to not see our children grow up. We're going to live in a diseased vessel. We're not going to have the ability to have a vehicle for the expression of our soul, etc. So another way to say this is if you are only willing to do what is easy, life will be very hard. If you are willing to do what is hard, life will be very easy. So another question, the third point on top of this, is in your current actions, ask yourself this as a governor between your actions to judge their validity. Are you making your future self proud or ashamed through your current decisions? So if you live this life, if your future you is looking back at you right now, through some sort of a crystal ball or some thought experiment, are they proud of you, of the current you, or are they ashamed? Are they regretful? Are they saying you should have been doing this? You should not have been engaging in those activities, et cetera, et cetera. Or are they thankful for what you have done and sacrificed for them? To close this, I want to close with a quote that I've honestly lived my life by this quote. And I referenced it in the beginning that I was grateful enough to live a former life with my present self in mind. So the quote that I want to end with before we move on to Q&A is, do something today that your future self is going to thank you for. So with that said, I'm going to move on to Q&A. I will pass it over to Shrikant to moderate.
All right, John, this is my favorite presentation by you. It was incredible. And I have about 36 questions for you.
Oh yeah.
But and all kinds of things I want to talk to you about. But I'm going to hold that until later on. So folks, you can line up for asking questions by typing ! in the chat. Please remember to keep on topic, be brief, and be courteous. So it's going to be Joe, Cotton, Dave, and Deborah with the H next. Joe, go ahead.
Hey, John, thanks for presenting this evening again. This was actually really, really good. I mean, just the presentation itself was awesome. One of the things that I've actually encountered over, the years is that, and I'm not at this point right now, but when I do get intense with taking care of myself physically, it almost becomes an addiction. Mm-hmm. And so, do you have any actually kind of recommendations with boundaries on the other way? Because the idea that, you start to look at yourself and that aspect of it becomes more of just as all-consuming as something that, on the flip side would be if you were just not exercising as well, just only indulging. So is there two sides to this coin? Is it more about balance, or is it more about, and I guess that gets to the consistency argument. So, but more than anything, but
yeah, that's a very good question. So for me, how I tend to look at it, because from the outside perspective, I do get that a lot. People say, "Oh, I'm obsessed. I'm this. I'm that. I'm spending too much time in the gym, whatever." But if you look at it in terms of your value structure, okay. So as I mentioned in the presentation, one of my fundamental cornerstone values is my health, because I have this body. See, my mind and my body are the only thing I have to the day that I die, right? Everything else is, I guess, transitory. And that's not saying I'm devaluing my relationships, my career, etc. Not at all. I'm just saying these are one of the fundamental things that I value. So if that is at optimum, I look at how that optimum health can influence the other areas of my life. Okay. So if I was, if I had attained this goal of a certain physique or a certain, strength level, how is it going to affect my relationships? How's it going to affect my productivity? How's it going to affect my career, right? I'm going to look at its application. And I don't think that's unhealthy. I would say it might be an unhealthy obsession, you can call it, or you might put a governor or a barrier on it, or a cap or a lid, if it was, if the pursuit of that goal was at the expense of other things that you valued in your structure. So if it's if that incremental gain between, okay, losing, maybe you had a goal to lose 50 pounds, you lost 45 pounds, and you're almost there, and you also value your relationship very highly, and you have an option. Okay, Friday night, I can either go to the gym and do my best to chip away at this 5 pounds, or I can go and spend a night out with my wife. And we've been, we haven't been on a date for several weeks, a month, whatever. At that point, that might be a limitation. That might be something that you want to, turn away. And I'm already, what is that, 95% there, or 90% there. I might as well just go with the wife at that point, because that small incremental gain of that one day at the gym, or that 5 pound difference, that is not going to overthrow the value of the relationship. You know what I mean? So in terms of a valuation structure, I'm lucky enough to have a lot of free time. I'm young. I'm not in a relationship. So I spent a lot of time in the gym. So it's that's my pretty much, I'm not gonna say number one focus, but it's at the pinnacle or near the pinnacle of my value structure.
Next up is Cotton. Cotton, go ahead.
Hi. So yes, thank you. And it seems like this is the philosophy of the current climate or culture, health and, you know, impacts mind, etc. So that seems good, but that seems like the purposes of that is like longevity without too much suffering, like diseases, etc. But on the other flip side, what about like, say, the great thinkers, the great artists, like Mozart, Einstein, maybe even Plato himself? Maybe they just were so engrossed in what they were doing, you know, the areas that they were focused on. And I'm most likely certain that their health was not that good. So what do you think of that, just as a counterpoint?
Well, as a counterpoint, the people you established, I've read several quotes about them emphasizing the importance of health. So I don't, particularly Plato, I've quoted Plato twice. But there are points. So even if we're not getting caught in like the specifics of the argument, you could say, okay, pick a random artist or pick a random, I don't know, somebody who's really good at their craft. And yes, they've gone so far down that, you know, cultivation of their skills, and they neglected their health, but they're still, you know, they still have a profound accomplishment on their hands. Sure. But I would make the argument health would only add to that. Okay. That's my argument. That's my philosophical belief. Can I prove that in terms of like an artist? I don't know. But that's my personal belief. I don't ever look at that as a detriment. And again, because it's consistency over intensity. They don't have to be in the gym. They don't have to, you know, be extremely rigid and disciplined and watching and tracking every single calorie that they eat. Not at all. Consistency over intensity. They can just engage in a little bit of light activity. One of my favorite authors, Nietzsche, is actually famous for doing this. He walked, I don't know, it was like, I think it was literally up to 7 or 8 hours a day. And he said things like, credit no thought that does not come as a product of walking. Okay, now walking, that's not a vigorous exercise, right? But it's still, it's a cornerstone to longevity and health, right? Henry David Thoreau said something similar. How vain it is to sit down to write when you have not stood up to live. Now, is that literally walking? I don't know. It's more of like a embodied practice, what you preach type quote. But nonetheless, I would never look at health as a detriment, as subtracting away from their creations or from their proliferations in the world.
Next up is Dave.
Thanks, Shrikant. Hey, John, great presentation. Really thought-provoking. You mentioned that you measure things in your life pretty aggressively, and that it's been pretty beneficial. I'm wondering your philosophy behind that, how you do that, and what metrics you're tracking. I'm sure you know what gets measured gets managed. That's a popular quote in management. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. You can't improve anything you don't measure. So, I mean, I don't know what, like in high school, one of my favorite subjects was math. I was always just like mathematically oriented. So I always loved looking at numbers. You know, the phrase numbers never lie, right? It's objective. It's truthful. I've always relied on those because they are objective and you can't bend them and misinterpret them. I can look in the mirror. I can say, however, this clothes, you know, how these clothes fit, etc. That's not a good enough metric for me. I like concrete. I like to see these specific barriers. So, okay, am I here? Am I here? Am I here? And going back to the presentation I established earlier, the point I established earlier is fitness and health are one of the only areas I could think of that you can completely quantify, completely. Like my health, my physique, everybody's physique is the fundamental result in the manifestation of a mathematical law. You know, calories in versus calories out, for example, in terms of your weight, you know, your performance in terms of your vitamin and mineral levels. So to circle back to the answer, what I track my circumference measurements. I track my weight. I track my body fat percentage. I track in terms of not really health related, but I do track my disciplines. So if I read, if I exercise, meditate, audiobook, etc., all these things that I should do every day, I track those. I give myself a percent at the end of every single month and every single year. But in terms of physiology as well, I've been tracking every single meal that I've eaten for the past 5 years has been tracked, both on paper and digitally. So I can look at my calories, I can look at my carbohydrates, my fat, my protein, I can look at my macro breakdown, my percentages, etc. So not only because management, but also accountability. So if I eat, I don't know, a quart of ice cream and fast food and this and that, technically nobody knows, right? Nobody knows if I did that. I can go to the store right now. I can, you know, eat some fast food. But if I write it down, my future self knows. Okay. And I have to face like the guilt. I would feel ashamed of myself if I had to write down, oh yeah, today I woke up and I watched Netflix for 3 hours, and then I did this, and then I slacked off and I ate food. You know, it's very easy to do those things when they're not recorded, but technically they're not. They always are recorded by universal law, of course, right? Because we reap what we sow. So I'm just operating in terms of a better grasp of the law, in terms of I can look at my notes, my journals, and I can tell the future that way. You know what I mean? Because I can tell exactly what I've done for 5 years. So I can predict my future when I have that data in front of me. So it's very empowering.
Next up is Deborah. Deborah, go ahead.
Hi. Okay. So I don't know, maybe this is more of a comment than a question, I guess. I feel like there's a question kind of folded in there. One of the things you were saying sounded very extreme to me, and I feel like it is very relative. Like it sort of sounds like a slippery slope kind of argument, though, because to me it sounds like the other way to look at it basically is that like if you put things off for so long, then you may miss opportunities. So it doesn't sound like moderation to me, and I feel like your life can pass you by. Also, you mentioned freedom before, and I feel like that's relative for different people. So like I can definitely understand trying to be healthy for its own merit, but it's like you can drive yourself crazy keeping track of everything. Like I know I tried to do that and that did not work for me, because I feel like mental health wise, forget about physical health, obviously that's important, but it is a balance, because like I was like, this is not good. Like I'm making myself sick just worrying about things. And also like I guess maybe you can't quantify everything, so maybe you can't put a number on joy in the moment, but maybe that's the point. So again, it might be that like difference of opinion, but I think there's value in saying, okay, like that's fine. I have free time or something that isn't so disciplined, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So there is a few points there. I mean, you're absolutely right with the whole like tracking thing. It could drive some people crazy. Like some people have inquired about like the system that I've used to track all my stuff, and I've shared all that with them, and they're like, dude, this is crazy, I can't do this. And that's perfectly fine. Or like it's just over the top. I just love data. Like I said, it's not a chore for me. It's something that I literally look forward to. And that's I'm not saying everybody should do that by any means. You know what I mean? I've just found a system that works for me, and it's very pleasant and rewarding and empowering for me to do that. That's why I do that. So it's not like I'm not looking at it as a chore. I'm not like, oh my God, I have to go to the gym. Or I'm not waking up like, okay, what's the healthiest thing I can eat possible right now? You know what I mean? It's just like I look at it as more so an extension of my philosophy. So once I cultivate my beliefs enough around health, action is just secondary. I don't have to, none of my actions are forced in that manner. They're just extensions of what I believe. And to the second point, freedom is relative. You're absolutely right on that too. You know what I mean? To bring up the answer I had to Joe's question of the value structure, right? Like a very active lifestyle is a high value for me because there's so many things that I want to do. You know, I'm still young. I want to try a bunch of sports. I want to try all these things and like go on all these hikes and stuff like that. So for me to do that, what would make all of those things easier and more accessible is optimum health and peak performance. Therefore, like that's freedom to me. You know what I mean? Being able to go on a hike on whatever weekday I felt like it without much preparation. You know, if I wanted to go, I don't know, fly to Vermont tomorrow and go snowboarding, I could, you know what I mean? Because I'm not limited by my body, in other words. So you're absolutely right with that relative, as well as the tracking. It's all absolutely an extension of like what I believe.
Next up is Aaron and Jean. So Aaron, go ahead.
Hey, John, fantastic presentation as always. I really love the Plato quote that you gave, and anyone who knows Plato knows that justice was his highest form of virtue. And I think that that's an excellent way of looking at the gym and looking at your eating habits and all these other things, because in life, a lot of things in life are very arbitrary. You work really hard at work and you get screwed over through politics and whatever. Sometimes you're trying really hard in a relationship and something goes sour. But I've always felt that the gym is the one refuge where pure justice exists. It's like the one place where you can go to the gym and you know that you are getting results, and there's just no way around that. And no matter how angry and frustrated you are at life, having a place, a sanctuary where pure justice exists can really, really, really just change your mind for the better. And that's how I've always thought of the gym.
100%. One of my favorite, like, I mean, he's not even like an influential figure, but there's this guy, I don't even remember his name. It's like one of these like guys who's really big into bodybuilding. He was kind of talking about that, like it's justice. And he said, in his words, he says, 200 pounds will always be 200 pounds. Like, it's just there. Like, it's not, you know what I mean? It's always like, here's your test. Here's your measurement. Here's your quantification. It's just laying there waiting for you to pick it up. It's like, that's the measure of yourself. It's like, I don't know. I look at it as like a playground almost, like not only just the gym, but like the world. It's like everything is a measure for you to hit your boundaries and like, okay, I've clearly defined my boundaries. Therefore, next time I come around, I'm going to know where I can push myself, where I can't. But if we don't, you know, there's so many realms in life where it's ambiguous, it's unclear. There's these weird equivocal edges and all this. It's amorphous. But like exactly like you said, the gym is just completely justice. It's just iron, it's weight, it's numbers. It's like, you know, it's so humbling when you have that. And there's not many other aspects and realms we can enter in that are that much of a judge on our character.
So can you take your laptop?
Next up is going to be Jean. Jean, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Yeah, this is a fascinating topic because I always observe, like I ask my son who's 12 years old, like, who are your friends? There's a sports group who are very good with sports, and there's a girls group. Then there's the other kids, and he's hung out with the other kids. My son is allergy, you know. So actually my question is, you know, like my husband and me, we both understand the importance of health and we exercise regularly. The problem is how we motivate the kids, because I think when you understand the why, you will find how. You know, I was thinking about exercise since I joined Landmark 2 years ago, but finally I get the routine into it. But so my question is, like, the teenager right now, like 15-year-old I have, he has no interest going outdoor. I take them camping, like the third time, nobody wants to go. Everybody except me want to go in my family. I was like, I cannot drag them to camping. Like, it's so great. The kids, they are so into the electronic. It's really damaged. And with Corona, no, they don't go to school anymore. And everybody's sitting there and play games. It's just like, I really wonder how can motivate them to exercise? How can help them they learn from physics education, but I don't think they truly understand it. So I wonder, you know, you're young, you know, how you get inspired? How can we inspire the kids to really do it?
Yeah, that's a very, very complicated question. I mean, I would say try to figure out what they want and try to posit it that health is the most effective way to get what they want. Like, similar to my answer to Joe's question, like once they had optimum health, or like an active lifestyle, or a lifestyle of always going outdoors, is going to get them the same result that they want. But then again, it could also be just like a phase. You know what I mean? Like I said, I wasn't always active. I wasn't always into health. I was a teenager that was just kind of like you're describing. I would always sit inside. I played a lot of video games. I did not live an active lifestyle at all. And then I just kind of grew out of it, in short. Like, nothing really particular, like, I don't know, influential, or like there wasn't really a main catalyst necessarily. But I can tell you, once I did personally get in the gym and I saw results, it just became a game after that. Like, I just saw, you know, as Aaron just said, it's a game where you immediately see feedback. You are the sole proprietor of the equation of growth. Next time you go to the gym, you can say, okay, I grew this much. I grew by this much pounds or this much weight, etc. Then I think exerting that control and having that influence over results in your life, that is extremely empowering. But in short, like I said, it could be just a phase, hopefully, you know what I mean? But I don't know, just I would say keep trying what you're trying, keep trying to lead by example maybe, and hopefully they'll grow out of it.
Next up is Maxine.
How do you get around the isolation of it? I find I do follow a very healthy diet, and if I go out to eat with friends, they hate me. They don't even invite me. If they say, well, you don't like to eat, so you can't go with us. Okay. And over the years, I didn't gain weight. They all gained weight. They don't talk to me. They hate me. Well, how do you get around all that? What do you tell yourself? I mean, it's difficult.
Yeah, that's a very important part too. Point. I've experienced the same thing. I mean, I'm very young, but there are a lot of connections that I've, I don't know, lost or grown out of, or just like there's a lot of just differing perspectives going on where it's like I don't even know what you have in common anymore. Personally, I would just try your best to find people that share the same beliefs and values, which can be difficult. Obviously, it's much easier said than done, and I mean that's one of the modalities we're all here on Zoom right now, like virtually. Like, if I could see you all in person, I would gladly. So I would say try to find people with a similar values and belief structure as you. And then in short, if they like if your current friends react with opposition, I mean, my response to this, I've said, I'm very blunt in terms of like my responses to my friends. So if they're like, oh, why aren't you eating with us? Why aren't you doing this? And I'm like, hey, I value, you know, my health at 50 and 60 years old and I'm looking at future oriented. So I'm saying I value the health of my future self more than social validation in the moment. You know what I mean? It sounds like blunt because it's like, I don't care what you guys think type of thing, but I'm just positive as like you value certain things differently. You know what I mean? It's not disrespectful.
I can't say that to my friends. They're all having knee replacements and hip replacements and everything.
Right.
You know, I can't say that.
Right. Then just ask them to respect your choices. That's fair. As a friend.
That I've walked with for 30 years, we went every morning like clockwork in the snow, in the whatever. Yep. But she, as she got older, gained weight. Now she doesn't talk to me. But I mean,
yeah.
It's difficult, very difficult.
Wonderful. So John, what are the questions for the breakout rooms?
Okay, yeah. So the questions, we have 3. The first, this is a very, very subjective answers. That's why I posit them. The first question is, what do you believe is the biggest barrier to sound health of the body, sound health? What's the biggest barrier to health? The second question is, what are some methods I already shared some of mine. What are some methods we can use to be more, I don't know, effective to promoting health in our lives? What are some, I don't know, actions, habits, routines, etc., for more health? And the third point is kind of related to Joe's question, actually. What are the reasons for people going too far in terms of like cultivating the health of their body at the expense of other things? What are the reasons that people might go too far?